Happy Friday, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Forgotten History stream on Twitch. Super duper stoked and happy to do this presentation because this one hits a little bit closer to home for me. Some of you might know a little bit about my background with this. Some of you don't. For those of you who don't, I'll just spare you and give you the short abridged version. B-2 make me want to be Mill. Never happens, of course, but welcome each and every single one of you to the first in a series of three. There will be three actual pieces to this presentation. We'll be doing part one tonight. We'll be doing part two in a couple of weeks, 4 weeks, I think. 4 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. And then we'll be doing part three, I think, in May. But we're going to be talking a little bit about the B-2 bomber program. We'll be talking a little bit about the Spirit program as it's actually come to known, and kind of some of its origins. So there will be some feels, there'll be some ups and downs tonight, but we'll be getting into some nitty-gritty stuff in history. And we'll also be getting into something that I know you all will really like, is that we'll be talking a little bit about conspiracy theories tonight, because there's actually quite a bit of conspiracy theories that are wrapped up in the B-2 program, which shouldn't surprise anybody, but we'll be talking about those a little bit tonight. So let's kind of jump right into this. As you guys all know, I am the History Kid. I've been doing this stuff on Twitch now for, gosh, 8 months now. But we've been doing these presentations a little bit more frequently because we've been seeing an uptick in the likes and the needs and the wants. So if you always have a suggestion, always feel free to drop it to me. There's plenty of links down there and ways for you to get in touch with me, so please feel free to do so. Let's dig right into this. So what we have to start with tonight is defining the term a familial weapons system. Now, most of the time when people hear of families in weapon systems, there's a very distinctive type of weapon system that you might think of. You'll think of like F4 Phantoms, you'll think of things like Humvees and things like that, but there's actually two different types. The first type is called the inherent familial family. So it's a culmination of procured technology that evolves over a period of time that is traced back to a single ancestor. It has anthological characteristics, meaning that you can't just declassify a piece of it and expect that the rest of it can stay classified. Pretty much, you can get sensitive information off of any piece of that puzzle. So some examples of this are the atomic cannon, Atomic Annie, as we have discussed previously in one of these presentations, the Valkyrie program, and the Blackbird program. So these are all examples of an inherent familial weapons system. The other one is called the Operative familial system. So it uses uniform technology across multiple platforms. And it's a punchline thing. It's a feel-good kind of thing for people who are in budgeting, people who are in procurement, people who are in contracting. They love this because they feel like we can get a one-size-fits-all modular program that will cover all of our bases. However, in history, such programs generally don't work too terribly well when you're talking about larger systems. When you're talking about smaller systems or personal effects, you see success there, but we generally don't see much success when it comes to larger things. So examples of this are the F-35 Lightning, which we're dealing with right now, and depending on what side of the political fence you're on, you would see that as either a waste of money or the best thing since sliced bread. You would see things like the F-4 Phantom, and you would see things all the way back to the Hellcat family. Of course, the CAT series of aircraft spanned across a bunch of different things. Every single service used them, but they were an example of that operative familial. It was the same design concept, the same technology across multiple platforms for multiple purposes. But we'll see other examples in things like the A4 Sky and Seahawks. So the Air Force will use Skyhawks, the Navy and the Marines use Seahawks. The Harriers in the UK are an example of this. But generally, when you see things inherent familial, it's not something where you can just look at something and make the decision that that is, in fact, in an inherent familial system. There's nuances that you kind of have to dig into. There's trails that you have to dig into. It's not always quite clear, making the distinguished leap from point A to point B, where in the operative familial it is. Now, the point here that I want to make, and the reason that I was sure to throw in the atomic cannon and the cats, is that it's not uniform to the Air Force, and it's not uniform to Cold War and later. This has been a thing that the military has been doing forever. It's not a new concept at all. So I want to make sure that everybody is clear that this is not a new thing. This isn't a Cold War thing. This is just a thing. So we're gonna jump right into this. So originally, the program name that we're going to be talking with is called Aurora. That's the name of it. And any of you who spent any amount of time in the conspiracy theories, the hairs on the back of your neck probably just stood up when I mentioned that name. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But first, we have to start here with actual Aurora. So it was the Aurora inherent family of weapons is how this originally starts. And that started with a need that was defined in 1979 by the U.S. Air Force to come up with a solution to a problem that doesn't exactly exist. We see that a lot, especially in the Cold War era, starting with the bomber gap and and then before that even the B-36 scandal. But fulfilling a need that we don't actually have. And the code name Aurora was actually given to a program called the Advanced Tactical Bomber Program, the ATB program. Now, there were two competitive companies that were involved in this, just like there are with most of these kinds of competitions. Northrup was actually the winning bid for this program, but the entirety of this program is funded as the Aurora program. Now, it's important that I just drill that into your head. The ATB program in the DoD budget was called Aurora, and that's what it was always called from 1979 up until the total culmination and initiation of production in 1994. It was called Aurora for all those years. Please remember that as we go forward. Now, the standard procedure for any of these new programs was to be black. And when we say black, for those of you who don't understand that term, I'm sure some of you do, a black project essentially means that it is a program that requires the utmost secrecy within the federal government. So some examples of this, we've even talked about these before. The Manhattan Project is an example of this. The SR-71 Blackbird is an example of this. So these are all types of black projects, and the B-2 was the same. Now, the Aurora's function was to add a new dimension to evasion. And those of you out there who are paying attention would know that what is that new dimension? Well, it's a piece of technology that we have been working on and finally have perfected in the most recent period of time, and that technology is called stealth technology. Now, it's not new in 1979. I want to make that clear, but it hasn't been applied to this particular mission. It hasn't been applied to a tactical bomber or a strike aircraft of any kind just yet. The F-117 is out there, but it is also still a black project. Now, the origins in the design, as we're going to see, get traced back to 1946. It says on here. It actually gets traced back a little bit further than that. You can bring it back to about 1940, but we're going to say 46 for the sake of this particular presentation. And Northrup's 1981 victory in the program resulted a new name being established for it. So it's no longer the Aurora Inherent Family after 1981. It becomes the program known as Spirit. But again, The program is going to remain funded in the DoD's official budget as Aurora. Now, it is worth noting that Lockheed and Rockwell Aviation did both submit options or candidates for this program as well. And those of you who know what the F-117 looks like, Lockheed's entry actually just looked like a blown up F-117. That was, think it was 3 to 4 times bigger than the F-117 attack aircraft was. That's what they submitted. And I've seen conceptual drawings of this thing, and it just looks ugly. It's one of the ugliest things I've ever seen. But one of the things I also want to convey to you is at the time, here's the situation. At the time that ATB is becoming a thing, President Carter had just canceled the B-1A Lancer program in favor of ICBMs and B-52s. The B-52s around that time had just been modernized. They are straight off of the Vietnam War at this time. So they are the glue that was kind of holding together SAC at the time. And the only real powerful staying ability for the nuclear triad as far as air power delivery at the time. And that is a B-1A Lancer bomber, not to be confused with the B-1B that we have now. That is the original B-1A sitting there. Of course, the B-1 is going to come back later in the 1980s. Reagan is going to bring it back. However, Reagan is also going to use the cancellation of the B-1 program to actually boost himself during the 1980 presidential election. And because of that, the B-2 is not going to stay super secret for very long. So we need to, this of course is a presentation about the B-2 bomber, so we are going to have to do a quick rundown in history of wings. But we're only going to do, first part of the 20th century here. So we're going to start here in 1910 with J.W. Dunn. He's a British officer. Unfortunately, he's riddled with a good number of medical issues and medical problems. So he unfortunately does not make it very far in the British Army. Conceptualizes the idea of flying wings over a series of tailless aircraft that he designs based off of his observations of how seagulls fly. He's got a lot of free time where he's spending on the ground wishing that he could be off doing something else. And so his idea is that he's going to study birds. Now it's important that I put emphasis on that. He is studying birds to understand flight. And no, that's not a joke, and that's not meant to be funny. It's important. It's extremely important. And we're going to come to that a little bit later. By 1917, U.S. Army is actually interested in Dunn's designs. So we have the Dunn Model D8 here. It's first flown in 1912. It is a swept wing design. So it's one of the first configurations where we see swept wings actually being a thing. Most people would say, oh, that's a Cold War era manifestation. No, it starts actually in 1912 with Dunn's design. And eventually the U.S. Army is going to pull the D8 in for use in the Signal Corps. And the Navy is actually going to be interested in it as well. They'll get two before I think they're unable to actually fulfill the orders, and the Navy will cancel that contract. Then we have to flash forward to Northrup, Jack Northrup, who we'll talk about in depth a little bit more here a little bit later. But he has his first flying wing, and that is the X-216H. Now, I know it's hard to see on your screen probably here. There's really no great photos of this aircraft, but if you look closely, you'll see it's not really a flying wing. It's actually a boxed tail design. So it's a flying wing with a tail. So it's not a true flying wing. But he uses the lessons that he learned from this X-216 design for the development of the N1, which will come later, and we'll get to that here in a moment. But around the same time, Germany. Everyone's just like, oh, geez, THK can't get through a presentation without talking about Germany. You're right, chat. You're right. In Germany, we have the Horton Brothers. And the Horton Brothers are extremely important because when the Americans go over after World War II in Operation Paperclip, they're going to pull a lot of research data and information off of the Germans. And a lot of the information that they're pulling off comes off of jet engines and aerodynamic research and design. And the Horton Brothers are actually at the forefront of aerodynamic research and design. We'll talk about them a little bit more a little bit later, but the Hortons are basically interested in gliders. They're very interested in gliders. They were contemporary with Northrup, but Northrup was focused on building powered frames. The Hortons generally were looking at reconnaissance use, which gliders could be used, or for paragliding, things like that. So they weren't really, until the war really kicked off, they weren't looking at powered flight quite as much as they were looking at gliders. So that's where the two differ. Now, jumping forward to 1940, this is Northrup's N1M. And when I look at the whole tree for the Spirit program, this is where I normally say it begins. So it was actually a series of tailless aircraft. The designs were based largely off of, well, actually, that's incorrect up there. That's still JW, what's his name's? So the N1 used two propellers at the back. It still used this conceptualized idea of a flying wing over a series of tailless aircraft. But Jack Northrop was doing some of the same things that J.W. Dunn was doing, in that he was actually using birds as a kind of a basis, a foundation for what it was that he was observing and trying to convey here. So the N1M is a successful model, but again, there's nobody to buy it. At this time, there's nobody to buy such a new aircraft. There's no function nor purpose, nothing for Northrop at this time. By 1943, we see the conceptual designs for what was known as the Horton Model 4 glider, which is then remade into the Horton Model 9. And this is what is going to be the Germans' kind of last stance. It was what was termed a wonder weapon. So it comes in, it gets introduced in 1945. Actually, I think they get one finished off the line in April 16, 1945 is when they get one off the line. And by the time they get this aircraft off the line and ready to go, the Americans are right there. So, unfortunately for the Germans, and fortunately probably for everybody else, Horton HO-229 never does get off the ground, but it's a jet-powered aircraft like the Messerschmitt 262, and it was fielded late in the war, like I said, the last few months. The order goes through in March. They get one off of the line in April, but Paperclip actually comes in and pretty much mothballs all of them that they can find. By 1946, Northrop's got his larger flying wings now up, so he's been using the research off of the N1M to come up with designs that the Air Force really is interested in. So he'll come up with the YB-35 and the YB-49. These were originally designed to take over the mission that the B-29s are going to fill. So when the B-29s come in and they fill that slot, there's really no need for the B-35 anymore, but the need for bombers is increasing, and the ability to carry heavier payloads is increasing with the dawn of and the advent of atomic bombs. So the YB-49 is the solution to that, the jet-powered design. However, unfortunately, it does get canceled. So the YB-35 was not really considered all that great and viable. There were two YB-49 prototypes that were lost, and a lot of them are cited to be under rather suspicious circumstances that they were lost. There's a few things going on in there that lead a lot of people to believe that it was industrial sabotage, but there's nothing that's concrete or proven. There's not enough information there for that. Unfortunately, a series of political games, specifically that were connected not at all to Northrop, it was connected to the to the B-36 Peacemaker, and a huge scandal that had erupted with that aircraft had ultimately left the Air Force waiting entirely with retrofitted B-29s and badging them as B-50s, and the upcoming B-52 project, which was already well underway. That's where the Air Force went. And then they decided not to go backwards to the YB-49 when things like the B-58 Hustler and the Canberras were coming on the scene. Northrop just kind of fell out of the picture for the need of bombing aircraft by that time. So let's take a look here a little bit at the German design real quick before we jump ship here. So this is the Horton Model 9, or the 229. There's no complete models that are left. Like I said, all of them were mothballed. There's plenty of mock-ups. There's an original air chassis still. Whoops. But there's no real mock-up of this thing left anywhere. So the Horton Brothers began to experiment with blended wing gliders in 1934, as you saw. Most of the designs were unpowered and intended just to be used as reconnaissance, but they were highly agile and stable. They were extremely stable, extremely well controlled. They made 6 gliders from 34 through 40. The last model, Model 9, of course, was a powered design, and it was converted for use by the Luftwaffe. Now, the Luftwaffe had originally required it for it to be a strike bomber. Eventually, it gets converted into a day fighter variant because they are finding that they need day fighters more than they need a strike bomber. So the Hortons brothers are going to try and lob 20 of these out. Like I said, they get 1 or 2 out the door, and that's about all that there is left. There's plenty of pieces of the puzzle left, but there's no completed pieces. So the big thing with this aircraft, though, is the jet propulsion system that it was used, which is similar to the 262 and the 234. But it also supposedly had a reduced radar cross-section, an RCS. Radar was still iffy during this time, so whether or not that radar cross-section was a matter of it using sleeker parts versus paint, the Germans cite that it was paint. The Americans cite that it was parts and design. Which one of those is right? I lean towards the American analysis of that, not because I'm an American historian, but because it makes more sense. When you look at the design of the aircraft versus whether or not the Germans had radar-absorbing paint. I don't think there was quite enough research out there for them to have had that. Could they have? Sure. And I'm fine with being wrong, but that's kind of where I stand on that. But the strike aircraft variant, or the strike bomber variant, was supposed to be able to carry 1,000 pounds worth of bombs, but both models were supposed to have 30 millimeter guns built into them, and did have 30 millimeter guns built into them. So Jack Northrup, the man who saw the future of aviation, and boy did he ever. That's Jack with the YB-35 over there, and the 216. So Northrop had begun working on aviation design in 1927. Northrop is actually a great example of a guy that keeps getting kicked and knocked down and getting back up again, because he'll launch the company Avian. It'll fail in a year. He'll then get backed by Donald Douglas, who is of Douglas Aviation, and he'll enter as a staying power in 1932 as Northrop's subsidiary company, and then he'll establish that subsidiary in 1939. He's going to break off on his own to be a little bit more free to do what he wants to do and needs to do in 1940. And by that time, things are starting to look a little bit iffy about World War II. So they've had 2 successful model aircraft come up by this time that Northrop's made a name for himself by. So the first all Northrop design to gain notoriety is the N1M, that yellow aircraft that I showed you earlier. By 43, he had begun to field proposals for a new long-range strategic bomber, which would have slotted into the B-29's area. But the program was totally canceled in 1950, and that whole program was shelved. But that didn't stop Northrop. So he continues on to be instrumental in the development of the F-89 Scorpion. He's going to be involved in the Snark ICBM weapon system as well. His design was a cornerstone of Aurora. So he absolutely is, and we're going to see it later, that he is credited with the design and authorship of the Spirit design. So he was also he was involved in all these different things, and Northrop was actually right at the forefront of fly-by-wire technology too, something that was absolutely revolutionary in avionics and aviation. So the flying wings, there were two flying wings. There were two actual different designs of the flying wings. And if you guys are wondering why some of the text on the screen isn't changing, that's called I finished the presentation 15 minutes before the stream started. So just pretend it says something different up there. But the important information has changed. So the first flying wing design, the N9M, was based on the N1M and then designated YB35. That's that top right picture there. It was the entry for that potential replacement of the B-24 and the slot filler for the B-29, and Northrop competes against Consolidated. Design was extremely stable. You're going to see that a lot with flying wing aircraft. And Northrop actually will win that contract in 1941. So the X and YB-35s were made obsolete, unfortunately, by the jet engine and new missions. What were the new missions? Atomic diplomacy. So there was a need to fill a slot for an aircraft that could actually carry and lob atomic weapons, and the YB-35 was not it. The result of that is that we get the YB-49, which, if you're looking between the two aircraft, you will see key differences. You have a turbo piston engine powered aircraft with 4 turbo pistons versus an 8-engine jet powered aircraft in the bottom left. So that is one of the key differences between the 35 and the 49. It boasted the ability to fulfill the new USAF requirement for long-range strategic bombing. And it also, like I said, was capable of carrying a heavier payload, was capable of also having a little bit more oomph to it with those jet engines. Both the B-35 and the 49 did get ordered, but all of those orders were canceled before they could be fielded. So there's actually some talk out there about the number of B-35s and 49s that actually went to production. It was the 49 that made it to the most production, but it's also the B-49 that was used for the Aurora Spirit program. So when you're seeing the 49, you are seeing the signs of the things to come within that program. So the ATB program, what is it? Well, the mission requirement of the program meant it was to remain black. So Carter's cancellation of the B-1 could be attributed to the viability of the technology in a long-range stealth bomber. So that is the key thing. They wanted a long-range strategic stealth bomber is what the need was. Reagan in 1979 was criticizing the Carter administration, particularly on the cancellation of the B-1. And as a result, the Carter administration decided to disclose that they were working on the ATB program. Now, it's important to note that he discloses the ATB program. He doesn't disclose what the mission of that program is, nor who the contenders, nor aircraft specifications, nor design. So basically, all that Carter comes out and says is, hey, we got a program. What's the program? It's for a bomber. What kind of bomber? I don't know. And that's not for ignorance, that's for national security. And I will argue that to the death, as much as I was not a Carter fan, that Carter's arguments here are to keep national security. So there is a small public disclosure of it. But, as we'll see later, the B-2 did not enjoy the same secrecy as many of its other Black Project counterparts. Northrop's design countered a proposal from Lockheed and Rockwell. Like I said, it failed to meet all the requirements. So this design that Northrop came up with was called Senior Ice. That was the prototype, that was the mock-up name for the program, was Senior Ice. Lockheed's was called Senior Pig. I like to call it Senior Pig because it looked disgusting. And on 20 October 1981, the USAF chooses the Northrop design for full production. And this is where the term Spirit comes from, and that is where things begin as the Spirit program. Here we go. Now, here's the fun part, guys. I told you we were going to get to some fun stuff. Don't feed the tinfoil hatters. There's plenty of these people who are still out there and still think this to be true. I love this thing. Unfortunately, the timing that Aurora shows up in the DoD defense budget and gets leaked out coincides with the cancellation of the SR-71. Now, you know how people are. At the same time, Rockwell has fielded a technology demonstrator called the X-30. It is a pulse-powered 4-engine aircraft that is designed to test hypersonic resonance and transport. This is currently ongoing at the time that Aurora is contemporary. So what do people do when they get a hold of a defense budget that says that they see a name in there that they don't recognize and it's a black project? Well, clearly it's some kind of new supersonic super vehicle. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happens, and we're still dealing with that conspiracy today. So up here on the upper right is an artistic rendering of the supposed Aurora aircraft that has a quad pulse engine hypersonic interceptor / reconnaissance aircraft that is shaped entirely like a triangle. There have been like 5 movies about an aircraft like this, including the new Top Gun, and it is infuriating. But if you notice, NASP actually, and that's NASP down here in the lower left-hand corner, NASP actually looks quite a lot like that design. But then there's also the X-43 Hyperdart, which is the one that's right next to it, and that is an aircraft that is actually actively being flown. The X-43 drone was unmanned. Both of these were unmanned, and they were designed explicitly to test hypersonic travel. So, and to test rocket engines for things, like SpaceX and things like that. So, Pulse technology was under development on drones. NASA used data collected on NASP in order to actually do trials for the X-43, but because Aurora appeared in the DoD budgeting, a lot of conspiracy theorists out there insist that there is a Lockheed SR-72 Aurora that exists out there somewhere, actively, is currently flying in mass production. No, bad. If you talk to one of those people, send them my way so I can smack them. Aurora, as it was described, was Project Spirit and nothing else. There was nothing else in that budget. So, the Spirit of America. So, Spirit takes shape here. So, on 22 November 1988, we finally get something tangible for this program, and that is Spirit of America over here, known as AV-1. Black project by nature, the B-2 suffered from several espionage issues. There were 2 Northrop employees that were arrested for espionage since 1984. One of them was as recent as 2005, where a Northrop employee attempted to sell B-2 technology to the Chinese. The project was delayed as well, so there were a couple of years worth of delays that inflated the project $23 billion over budget. But the biggest changes had to do with the longevity concerns of the aircraft. So there were things that were needed to be added in that changed the mission just enough that we had to add $23 billion to the project program. But because of the general nature, what had been established by the Carter administration, there just wasn't quite as much secrecy involved with the B-2 program. But the thing about it was is that it was still largely relatively secret. It was still a very exotic design. So the first flight of the aircraft doesn't take place until 17 July 1989, but we still have no idea when the actual first aircraft flew. That is still to be decided, still to be told. And there's some evidence out there that wants to suggest that these first two-digit numbers actually indicate when the first part rolled off of the assembly line. Whether or not that's true, I couldn't tell you. I'm not here to tell you that that's what it is. But it would make sense. 1982. Unfortunately, the only problem that I have with that is that that would mean that Spirit of America here would have had to go through some actual live production changes, and I just don't think that's the case. Spirit of America's procurement did not happen until the year 2000, which was after the assembly and production had ceased, and that was because it was still actively being used for actually managing and observing avionics updates. So we were still trying to field some of that. There were 165 B-2s that were planned for procurement, and the first B-2 was delivered to the Air Force in 1993, finally reaching operational capabilities in 1997. So, avian in origins. Like I said, it's important to keep in mind that people were observing birds at this time. So the B-2 was created based on observations of eagle flights. Aerodynamic design, low profile, provided stability and reduced RCS. So not only did we have the paint that we added to this aircraft, we had reduced radar cross section because of how it was on the surface. How? Well, the external control features were actually flush with the body, and embedded engine exhaust masked the heat signatures and sound. So if you look on the back of the B-2, you know how on most aircraft the afterburners in the engines and exhaust are actually visible. Whether they're not on the B-2, they are nestled into the body. And because of that, it doesn't give off quite as big of a heat signature either. So homing missiles and things like that are a little bit more, they have a little bit more of a hard time dealing with the B-2. Has a ridiculous operational range of almost 7,000 miles, operates on average between 20 and 30,000 feet, but it has a max up to 50,000, and it has an ordnance limit of approximately 40,000 pounds. Has 4 jet engines built into it, so there's 2 nestled on each side. The takeoff weight is around 169,000 pounds. Now, the Air Force orders 165. 21 were produced, and unfortunately, we lost one in 2008. $1.4 billion off of a moisture error that was not a pilot issue or a mechanic issue, but it crashed off of takeoff. So that was a thing, and everybody freaked out about that one, I remember, and for good reason, but they still did. It was it was quite a bit of an issue. But the trickle-down innovations. Now remember, I said that it was an inherent familial design and an inherent familial system. And indeed, there is a little bit more to it than just the B-2. So we have here the YF-23. Why am I talking about the YF-23 in a B-2 presentation? Well, my friends, it's because the YF-23 uses B-2 technology in its design. Again, inherent familial weapon system. So the ATF program was launched in the 1980s. Northrop uses this trickle-down technology and actually injects it into the YF-23, such as the flush control surfaces, the nestled engine compartments and components, things like that are all being included into the YF-23. Now, the big problem with the YF-23, though, is that Northrop was not going to market it very well. And ultimately, that's what brings it down, and nobody can convince me otherwise. Marketing is what crashed this program, no pun intended. I'll be talking about that a little bit more in an upcoming presentation in the series, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But despite losing the program, Northrop actually pitches it to the Navy. They have their ATA program. The ATA program gets shut down. The Navy oversteps its boundaries and ends up taking the Super Tomcat, which then gets replaced by the Super Hornet, which then gets replaced by the Lightning. Yeah, Navy, good budgeting. There's additional bomber programs that come up between then and now, uh, but every single time Northrup's proposal gets dropped, up until the B-21, the Next Generation Bomber program, which is also going to be a topic for another presentation in this series. But as I mentioned, there is a reduction in how many aircraft get procured. So the Air Force orders 165. They get 20. Why do they get 20? It's $1.4 billion per unit. It's the costliest aircraft in the inventory, so it was a hot button issue. And Congress largely opposed the program, especially once the Soviet Union decides to disintegrate and explode itself, as it was going to do anyway. There was enough opposition that led the Air Force to condense its order from 165 to 20, with all future orders canceled. Now they do get that one extra one. They bring in Spirit of America, so they get 21. Of course, they're now back to 20 because Spirit of Kansas had to go and crash itself. That again, not a pilot error. But this is a fantastic piece of information here too. So the B-2s, all the B-2s that are out there are operated by one bomber group. That is the 508th Bomber Group at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Now, the 508th used to be known as the 508th Composite. And any of you who remember us doing our World War II presentations know that the 508th Composite group is actually the group that was flying the Enola Gay and the Boxcar in the Pacific Theater, including the crew that was flying the Boxcar and the Enola Gay in August of 1945 when those atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I've always found it interesting that the 508th is actually able to trace their lineage back that far to the 508th Composite. So yes, the heraldry for the B-2 bomber group exactly the same as those in the Pacific Theater in 1945. So what is the B-2's operational footprint? What does it do? What's its main function here? So the B-2's intended mission was to be a long-range stealth bomber, and it filled the need within the bomber triad and the nuclear triad. And for those of you who need visualization, that is the bomber triad on the upper right-hand corner. That's all three bombers that are in that triad. The primary bombing mission was a nuclear one until about 1996. So before it enters full operational conditions, it is actually lost its main primary bombing mission, and it has to be supplemented in with conventional. The modern deployment uses of the B-2 have been for combined function, and the estimates for the B-2's range and operational status take it out to between 2032 and 2058. I think these are conservative. Unless we start seeing these things crashing all the time, in which case they're going to probably pull it. I don't see these aircraft being retired quite that early, but we'll see. The first combat that the aircraft saw was in the Kosovo War in 1999. It then flew operations in Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, and then had sorties against IS and hostile forces in Syria. So we are actively using these aircraft, just like we are actively using the B-1s and the B-52s. But the B-2s are in constant motion, so you will never see. You might see 3 or 4 at an installation, and that's about it. But they are in constant motion. The point of this is that they're hard to find. You never want to see them in one place for too terribly long. So the B-2s are constantly cycled through with their home base at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. So the next generation bomber program, where does the B-2 bomber go from here? Well, from here, it goes to the B-21 Raider, which Northrop is also designing right now. So this slide was hard to work on just because there's not a lot of good information out here on this yet. I'm going to kind of abridge it here, though, for you. The B-21 is designed to fill a gap between the B-2's operational lifespan and the 2037 bomber and the 2050 bomber. So there's two bomber programs out there besides the NGB that the B-2 is not expected to fill the need for. Again, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think we're going to see B-21 bombers operating with B-2s for probably a good 20 or 30 years, but that's generally the gist of things. The project is a gray project, which means that the technology and design of the aircraft is probably going to remain classified for quite a long time, but its existence is not going to be something that is necessarily a national secret. It's going to be smaller. It's supposed to carry a little bit less, and it's supposed to be a lot more agile than the B-2 bomber is. So 160 have been ordered across 5 different installations in the United States. I expect that number to go up just because of the increasing costs of the B-52 program at this point, which they're now extending out to 2060, and I don't understand why. But I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it, huh? Although I guess if it's dripping gasoline and oil everywhere, you should probably fix it. But what do I know anyway? So where does that leave us in the program? Well, we had the N1, we had the YB-35, the 49 up to the B-2. The YF-23 is mixed in there along with the B-21 development, and that up there, that is the artist concept of the 2037 bomber. Yeah, good luck there, Chuck. Um, but the B-21, that's probably a firm design. That's probably exactly where it is that we're going to see this program go. But the YF-23 is something that is very interesting, and a lot of people really like it when I talk the YF-23 because if anybody knows the story of how we get from the YB-49 to the B-2, the really in-depth story, that hearsay kind of thing, it is this: that in 1950, when Jack Northrop was told that we are not going to use this program and we are canceling the program, Jack Northrup takes all the documents and puts them in a closet where they sit. And they sit, and they sit, and they sit, and they sit. They sit there for 25 years. And all of a sudden, the Air Force says, hey, we need a design. And Northrup's able to say, I've got one. And he presents the Air Force with the YB-49. And he hands it off to his designers and says, make this modern. And the designers are able to do that with his blessing, and we get the B-2. That being said, the YF-23 has come up for a number of potential revivals. There have been regional bomber missions that they have considered pulling the YF-23 in for. There are reconnaissance operations that they've considered pulling in a YF-23 for. Both of them are still, sitting out there in storage, but the design and the idea that the aircraft has been totally shelved and permanently shelved is probably wildly incorrect. So that's something I want to make sure everybody is aware of. When we see these things end in Northrop's line, they're never truly gone. And indeed, I would be very surprised if we don't see some kind of additional development further down the road when we're replacing things like the F8 or the F-15s. The intended replacement for that is the F-35s. Well, the F-35s are proving that they may not be the most appropriate replacement for that particular platform. So we might see the need for an aircraft like the YF-23 once again. We'll see. Time will tell. However, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we got clued in here is this awesome photo and a brief momentary story that Jack Northrop was extremely ill, extremely sick at the time that the mock-up for the B-2 bomber had been produced. he was ailing to the point that they were pretty sure that he was going to die relatively soon. So they bring him into a room and they present him with a model of the B-2 bomber. And John Cashin, who was one of the lead personnel in that program, says as he held this model in his shaking hands, it was as if you could see his entire history with the flying wing passing through his mind. So this is a man who is, at the time, gosh, it's 1980 then. He's 85 years old at that time. He's 85 years old. Holding this new piece of technology. He had worked his entire life on this kind of thing. And every single time he had presented this design, they had basically refused to take it. And the story goes that he takes a piece of paper and a pen, and he writes on it in that room as he's holding this. Now I know why God has kept me alive for 25 years. And Jack Northrup passed away 10 months later. That was it. So, kind of a little bit of a heartbreaking thing. He doesn't get to see this thing fly. He gets to see it, but he doesn't get to see it fly. So it's a little bit harrowing knowing some of that. But that is how we get to the B-2 of today. And with that is, we're not going to wrap this up just yet. I'm going to see if you guys have any questions, but that is the conclusion of part 1 of this series. Part 2 will air on 9 April at 6 o'clock, so Friday, April 9th at 6 o'clock. We'll be talking about the ATF program, so we'll actually be talking about the YF-23 at that time and how that trickle down actually shows up in the YF-23 program. Then 7 May, we'll be talking about the not the ATF, I just said that, the Raider. We'll be talking about the B-21 a little bit more. Don't expect that presentation to be too terribly long just because the information out there is extremely limited. So we're going to kind of talk about how we get from the B-2 to the B-21. So we'll be talking a lot about B-2's operational history, the ailing of the B-1, the ailing of the B-52s, and how we get there. And then we're going to move on to a whole new program in June. We're going to be talking about the Valkyrie family, which will be rather interesting. And then don't forget, next week, 26th of March, we will be talking history in an age of media. That'll be a bit of a round table thing. You guys can actually interact just a little bit more. When I say just a little bit more, I mean a lot more. There's a lot more interaction on the historic affairs talks than on the forgotten history talks. But anybody have any questions or really any kind of comments that they want to share on the program? You flip this on my phone because there we go. Now I can read. Oh, now I can't. Now I can read. There we go. Truth is out there somewhere and flying. So, volunteer archivist commenting that reminds me that I'm going to have to update the SR-71 presentation because apparently they are testing those engines for something, aren't they? Yes, it explains the 2019 sighting of an SR-71. We finally got a reason, or a possible reason for that. So, we'll see. I got that email, though. That was a good email. I appreciated that. Yeah, so the Big Riff Kev. Everyone say hi to History Kevin, who's in chat, by the way. So Bonnie, you mentioned seeing the B-2 in Toronto. So when I was 4 years old. They were doing a field flight of the B-2 bomber, and it just coincidentally lined up with with an air show that we had in town. And that was my first ever air show. I was 4 years old. All right, so I was the history baby, the history baby, this baby. No, wait, 4 years old. History infant. I was history infant. So history infant was at the air show, this first air show ever, with the B-2 flyover, and that just rocked history infant's mind. And from that point on, history infant wanted to be involved in the military when he grew up. That was it. He wanted to be a pilot, and then the Air Force said no. So I really wish. Yeah, I wish he could have seen it fly too. But unfortunately, didn't quite get there. Running. Oh, okay. Takes place every year to close. That's really cool, actually. An F-22 flyby too. Yeah, so we had the F-22 here in 2014. That was a really, really cool flyby. I'm always a little bit sour on the F-22 though, because it knocked out the Black Widow, and I really wanted the Black Widow to be a thing. Like, I really wanted the Black Widow to be a thing, but history, Kevin, hit the follow button. Be my 105th. I know some people it'll make really happy. But yeah, so the B-2 is a little bit sentimental for me, just because of that. It's kind of like my origin story to a certain degree. So I forgot I had that turned on. But yeah, it's always been an origin story for me. Is that 7? Don't heckle people. Anything else, guys, that you want to comment? It's actually really cool that they could get that. That they could get both of those aircraft flying over up there. I'm actually really impressed. I appreciate it. All right, guys. Um, as is tradition on these, we don't raid normally with history streams, and I don't think John is streaming. Flack should be welcome, especially for an aircraft presentation. Oh, Bob, you killed me there. Red arrows. Yeah, I've seen the red arrows a lot. I feel like once you've seen them 5 times, you've seen them 20. You know. I'm so ready for the Blue Angels and their Super Hornets, though. I am super duper stoked for that. I can't wait. Let me check here real quick, guys. Let me see. I don't think John is streaming right now, but if he is not. So we'll probably. Oh geez, all my stuff's blowing up tonight. So John, Tattooed Historian, isn't streaming tonight, so we are gonna go ahead and just end here. Again, guys, I appreciate you coming tonight. Always appreciate it when people have feedback to give or comments to make. If you have suggestions for a stream, you can feel free to do so on the website. You can also feel free to do it via social media, although the website's probably the best way to do it. Like I said, we'll be back with another, the continuation of this series on 9 April at 6 o'clock. Otherwise, if you are into the less serious things, the less educational stuff, I will be back later tonight with alcohol in hand, and we'll be running through Final Fantasy VII because I enjoy pain, apparently, and I'm sure that somebody will be there to Val will probably be there to heckle me through it. But that's about all that I've got for you guys tonight. Again, I appreciate y'all coming, and we'll see you next time. Stay awesome, folks.